Hey everyone, how's it going? Josh Shepard here, and on this edition of the Threat Hunters Corner, we're going to be talking about a recent malware that's a keylogger, information stealer type piece of malicious software called VIP Keylogger. Now, the reason we're talking about this and the reason we're hunting for it is it uses some fun and not as commonly seen defense evasion techniques. These techniques include remote template injection from the initial access perspective, as well as a little bit of steganography, both from the exfiltration of data as well as from the initial payload to actually build the malicious binary. So, in terms of how this general execution flow goes, is it is initially transmitted via a phishing email. It'll either be some type of archive file, right? Like a gzip or a zip file, or a Excel spreadsheet. Now, on the archive file, so your zip, your gzip, it requires the user to download and then execute the actual binary. On the Microsoft spreadsheet perspective or Excel spreadsheet, it uses what's called remote template injection. So Microsoft has a nifty little feature where you can actually load in remote templates to help with your templating of whatever Office product you happen to be using. Now, threat actors abuse this to try to load malicious templates in. And in this case, we see the Excel doc loading a malicious RTF file that then attempts to exploit admittedly older vulnerabilities. So patching is important to then kick off the rest of the kill chain. So now we're both at roughly the same piece. So we have our archive zip file has to get executed by a user, and then we also have our remote file or remote template injection that eventually kind of drops a Visual Basic script that then downloads the follow-on. Now, the interesting piece is once we get to this execution point, it'll execute a PowerShell script. And what that PowerShell script does is it reaches out to archive.org. Now, this is the Internet Archive. It's perfectly a legitimate website, right? Most folks know it for like the Wayback Machine. It creates like the archive of the Internet, so snapshots of websites over time. And what the threat actor does is it uploads several different image files to archive.com. The malicious PowerShell script reaches out to archive.com, pulls down that malicious image, and within that malicious image file is actually a block of base64 encoded code that the PowerShell script then decodes and builds into a .NET executable, which is what the actual malicious payload to do all that fun info stealing and keylogging that VIP is known for. Now, these are some fun techniques, right? Remote template injection, we don't see too terribly often. Same with kind of steganography, especially on kind of the initial load. And all this is really for the threat actor to try to bypass your more conventional security solutions, right? Trying to bypass signatures by leveraging legitimate services, leveraging legitimate kind of built-in Office functionality. So from a threat hunt perspective, when we talk about our remote template injection, a couple big things we could do with this, right? So first of all, try to understand a baseline of what the Office product suite is reaching out to from a network perspective, right? DNS queries, IP queries. And then once you kind of get an understanding of that baseline, look for outliers, right? Especially if you have a larger enterprise, you could start picking out unusual outliers, like if Excel's making some weird DNS query to what looks like a DGA type domain, or a domain that maybe is just a one-off your environment, right? You have a single computer, single Excel instance reaching out to this random domain name could be something to look into, right? From a potentially malicious remote template injection. Same goes on your IP side of the house. So that's one thing you could look for, right? Is just any sort of unusual network activity originating from an Office product. And then on the other side is now we could look at unusual process spawning from an Office application. Right. So if you see your Excel process spawning PowerShell or maybe calling on W script or C script, right? These are things where now we know that Excel is trying to execute some type of script. Now, there are legitimate use cases for this, right? If you have some type of legitimate macro. But again, I think it's a worthwhile hunt and honestly analytic to write, because even in the event there is some known benign macro that's used in your environment, it should be pretty easily tunable. So that's kind of a couple tips and tricks around the template injection. Now moving over to your more kind of leveraging archive.org with this kind of steganography with the image with your encoded code. Really for this one, I would look at any sort of unusual process reaching out to archive.org. That's not a super common website for most end users to go to, so you could be pretty aggressive with that search and that analytic. I'd also kind of look towards any sort of unusual mark of the web that comes from archive.org, right? A lot of folks that are going to archive, usually it's just I've used it in the past to try to view content that may have been, taken down, like on social media, just as you're doing some type of threat intelligence research, or if you're trying to bypass a paywall or something, that could be beneficial. And so I'd look for mark of the web data, see if there's any sort of unusual file downloads that are marked from archive.org. And that'll help you kind of pick up just any sort of unusual really download from that service. And so that's a good way to kind of get after this campaign, is to just really look into behavior around archive and just see if it's being abused. Based on the research that's been published around VIP, it's pretty widespread, right? I think one of the image files, there are multiple different image files, but one of the image file was downloaded, I think 29,000 times. So pretty broad campaign. So definitely something to look into in your environment. As always, if you have any questions about what we talked about here, any comments or suggestions for future videos, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll see y'all during the next session, and y'all stay safe out there. Bye.